Hi guys, welcome to Elvis Presley Past, Present and Future. We're going to continue our Elvis journey today where we left off last time with the birth of Elvis. So join us on the journey and let's get into it. Tuesday, January 8, 1935. This was the night that Gladys Presley felt extremely uncomfortable. Because she had an unusually rough pregnancy, she was doing it tough. Suddenly, the pains began. The pains grew in intensity and the intervals became closer. She told Vernon, "I think it's time. You better get your mama over here." Vernon ran out the front door, running to his parents' house, which was the big house next door, and banged on the door, screaming, "Mama, Papa, come quick, Gladys is in labour." His mother, Minnie May, who was 41 years old at the time, went with her son to the little house next door. She looked at Gladys, asked her some questions, turned to Vernon and said, "It's time, you better call Dr. Hunt." Immediately Vernon ran out of the house and spreaded south to the Mississippi Highway 178. Where the nearest telephone was. He dialed Dr. Hunt and waited impatiently for someone to pick up that receiver. When Dr. Hunt got Vernon's call, he told the expectant father to calm down, go back to the house, and he would be there in a few minutes. Now, who was exactly present at Elvis's birth that early frosty morning in January 1935? According to Vernon, there was, besides himself, J.D., Minnie May, the midwife, Edna Richardson, a friend, and the doctor. Elvis was born a twin. It was impossible to say for certain if they were identical or not, but the fact that the mystery of death was in attendance at his birth, that the very beginning of his life marked the end of his brothers, affected him throughout his life in a way that people who are not twins would find it hard to understand. The naming of the Presley twins was highly significant. The first twin was named Jessie, after Vernon's father, with whom Vernon always had an uneasy relationship with. But nevertheless, it was a gesture, but an empty one, as the infant passed away. To the live child, they gave the middle name of Aaron. This was in honour of Aaron Kennedy, superintendent of the First Assembly of God Church. To the deceased Jessie, they gave the middle name of Garin, which rhymed with Aaron, in keeping with tradition in the area of giving twins rhyming names, such as Rhonda and Shonda, Meryl and Cheryl, Ronald and Donald. To the live child, they gave the first name of Elvis. It was Vernon's middle name, and his mother, Minnie May, had chosen it for him simply because she liked the sound of it. Back in his office, Dr. Hunt recorded the time of the births and the stillbirth in his ledger. The old-aged, far-sighted doctor, many a time without his glasses, provided the birth certificate with a writing error. Mistakenly, he spelt the infant's name Jessie Garian instead of Jessie Garin. Now, as you can see there on that picture, the ledger written by the doctor says Jessie Garian Presley. Male. Was the child legitimate? Yes. Twin or triplet? He wrote twin. Number in order of birth? Jessie was number 1. Father's name, V.E. Presley. White, 18. His occupation was a labourer. Mother's maiden name, Gladys Smith. Now, Elvis's birth certificate He was 920 in the register. So the 920th birth that Dr. Hunt had attended. Lee County, East Tupelo. Elvis Aaron Presley, male. Twin or triplet? Twin. Number in order of birth? He was the second one. Again, V.E. Presley. Also too, Gladys's details. And right down the bottom there, it says the number of the child was 2. Number of alive children at the time, 1. It also says there that he was born at 4:25 a.m. He billed the Presleys $15, but they couldn't pay it. But through the kindness of family, neighbours and friends from the Assembly of God Church in East Tupelo, where Vernon served as a deacon and welfare, Dr. Hunt was paid the sum of $15 for delivering Jessie and Elvis. Elvis's birth also was mentioned in the Tupelo News. There's the ad there that was telling everyone the twins were born. Also, Jessie Garen's funeral was actually put in there as well. That afternoon of January 18, a neighbour, Catherine Hall, was walking home. She got to the corner of Berry Street and Old Saltillo Road, where she lived, and came to an abrupt halt. She saw a crowd of neighbours milling around both Presley houses. She hurried past to her own front porch, where her mother was already outside waiting for her. Even before the 13-year-old could open her mouth and ask what was going on, her mother told her to go inside, quickly get changed into a clean dress and tidy herself up, because one of the twins, young Mrs. Vernon Presley next door, had given birth to that morning, had passed away, and they were going over to pay their respects. Catherine had prepared herself for what she thought she may see at the Presley house. She thought the worst. Once in the small front room of the Presley house, she took no notice of the people, or the food, or of Gladys and the live little baby in bed with her, but slipped away from her mother and went straight to the small open casket standing by the window. She fearfully peered into it. Her fear suddenly changed to astonishment. The tiny baby lying there was perfectly formed. The baby looked so peaceful, just like he was asleep. She glanced around the room and wondered if they'd all made a mistake. Catherine was talking to her best friend later on and asked her friend if everyone could have made a mistake and that baby was just asleep. Now, her best friend was one of Vernon's younger sisters. And she was told, of course the baby has passed away. She was told the second baby, the one that was all right, was born 30 minutes after the first, and they'd called him Elvis Aaron. Catherine asked her friend, what about the other one? Do they name babies like the other one? Her friend said, of course they do. How would he get into heaven without a name? God wouldn't know who he was. His name is Jesse Garen, and he'll be buried near the Presleys in the cemetery at Princeville, so he wouldn't be alone. At the Presley home, Matisse Finley, a school teacher who was surviving the Depression by working at the garment factory with Gladys before her confinement, was not concerned with the deceased twin, nor even with the little one, who was, in fact, didn't look all that lively to her. She was too shocked at the sight of Gladys. She was weak and in obvious pain, persistent pain. She began hemorrhaging. In Mertice's words, she looked close to death. She told Vernon to take them both to the hospital immediately. Gladys and Elvis would remain in the charity ward for over 3 weeks, Gladys recovering slowly with a lot of difficulty. It was this hospital stay that made Gladys instantly love her little boy more dearly. Gladys was swept into the extremities of maternal devotion. This was noticed immediately by friends and neighbours when Gladys and Elvis came back to the little house on Old Saltillo Road. Dot Rutledge used to come over to look after Elvis while Gladys went to the store. Dot remembers that when Gladys said, "I'll only be 5 minutes," usually meant she'll be back in 2 minutes. She could not bear anyone to look after her baby, let alone touch him. Maternal love for Gladys was not a sentimental attachment. Rather, it was a passionate concentration which deepened into a painful intensity when her son was not there directly in her sight. She imagined all kinds of horrors. She imagined he was being tortured and she was not there to stop it. It was a physical torment for her to be separated from him. This remained with Gladys for the rest of her life. Her anxiousness over one of Elvis's absences increased. The same year saw the death of Gladys's ailing mother, Doll, on April 13. She was 58. Later on, the same year, her mother-in-law, Anne Mansell, passed away on October 29, 1935. She was 86. Now, on April 5, 1936, when Elvis was 1, at 9:04 p.m. on the Sunday evening, a tornado twisted through Tupelo, causing massive damage. The tornado killed 235 people, injuring 350 and levelling 48 city blocks. So where was baby Elvis on this terrifying night? During the tornado, Gladys was with Elvis and Vernon's sister Gladys for the service at the Baptist church, when suddenly Vernon's uncle Noah appeared at the back and signalled them to hurry out. There were storm warnings. They all hurried on to the school bus of Noah Presley. Gladys with Elvis, Vernon, Minnie May and the rest of their children to Jessie D's house, right next door to Vernon and Gladys's house, before the rain began falling in sheets. Now that picture there, that is Vernon and Gladys's house there in the front, and the house next door was Minnie May's house, and that's the house where they actually stayed. Noah told them to get in the house, get under a bed and cover up. We're going to take a direct hit. He then ran as fast as he could back to his own house. This is another shot of Jessie and Minnie May's house where they stayed during the tornado. Gladys and Vernon crawled under a bed and held their little boy snugly between them. They heard the crash and splintering of debris as it hit the house, and the crumble of bricks surrounded across the street. Finally, after a few minutes, there was silence. Fortunately, the house remained intact. Vesta rushed into the house a few minutes later, telling everyone who can help to get on Noah's bus and go and help over in the town. The Presley men, including Vernon, went home to collect hammers, saws, picks, hoes, climbed aboard Noah's bus and went to the town. Gladys and little Elvis stayed at Jessie's house with Minnie May and the rest of her children. After a while, she took Elvis home next door to wait for Vernon, but she couldn't enter the home. She was too afraid. So she spent several hours sitting on her front porch, looking across the street at the hollow foundation of the Methodist Church. This is directly across the road from her house. How easily that strike could have moved up the hill another 100 feet and destroyed their home, or that of Vernon's parents. She was overcome with emotions, weeping with the knowledge that hundreds of families had just lost their homes and their families. This intensified her fear of storms, even simple thunderstorms. She gathered Elvis close to her and held him with all her might, thinking that a strong wind might sweep him out of her arms any minute. During the spring of 1937, several economic pressures added to the challenge that Gladys and Vernon experienced. Gladys had a terrible cold and couldn't clean house or take in washing or sewing for the public. Then things took a turn for the worst. Vernon continued to have a hard time supporting his young family. The continuing lack of money was the cause of a disaster for Vernon's little family. Just before Elvis turned 3, Vernon found himself in trouble with the law. In October of 1937, Vernon sold a hog to Orville Bean, and after they haggled, Vernon got a cheque to cover the purchase. Bean was a local businessman who owned a farm south of East Tupelo, and Vernon and his father, Jesse, worked sometimes for him. Bean also had loaned Vernon the money, $180, to build the little house where they lived. Maybe Vernon had thought the hog was worth more than the $4 cheque he received, or maybe he had been paying less than the value of the hog. Who knows? The circumstances are unclear. But Vernon was furious. He had been counting on more money. He was desperate. He talked it over that night with Gladys's brother, Travis, and a friend, Luther Gable. After a few drinks, and the fact that all three men felt hard done by with one thing or another, an idea emerged. Since Vernon had been sold short, why not make a cheque closer to the amount that he deserved? The three forged a cheque. It seems to have been forged to $14 or $40. The amount is unclear. The courthouse records of the indictment and sentencing do not include the details of how large a sum of money the cheque was forged to. On November 16, 1937, Vernon, along with Gladys's brother Travis and their friend Luther Gable, were indicted for forgery and placed under bonds of $500. On January 4, 1938, the $500 bonds were filed for Travis Smith and Luther Gable, but not for Vernon Presley. C.E. Biggerstaff and J.H. Gable stood as securities for Luther Gable, and Jesse D. stood as security for Travis Smith. Jesse D., Vernon's father, did not lift a finger to help his son. Instead, Jesse used the circumstances to rebuke Vernon more publicly and viciously than ever before. JD had the resources to bail his son out of jail pending trial and bring him home to his wife and child, but he did not. Instead, he co-signed the bond that freed Gladys's brother Travis until the court convened in May 1938. The message was clear. Family and clan counted for everyone except Vernon. Why would a father do that? We know that Jesse D and Vernon did not like each other. Jesse was always very hard and mean to Vernon. Vernon had a hard time providing for his family. Could this desperate condition have caused him to sell a hog that belonged to his father, maybe? The community of East Tupelo put great pressure to Orville Bean. Their opinion was to show leniency towards the offenders. Gladys was especially active at rallying everyone, from the preacher and the congregation of the First Assembly of God, to aldermen, to Noah Presley, at the time, mayor of East Tupelo. Anyone she could approach on Vernon's behalf, she went to. She went to Orville Bean herself, pleading extenuating circumstances in the family, their hunger, the age of their small boy. But nothing could shake his anger. His view was that he had only bought the hog from Vernon in the first place to help him out. And look what Vernon turned around and did to him. If he couldn't trust his workers, how was he going to run his farm? Bean was heard to call Vernon what was considered in those lean years to be a very grave insult. He called Vernon long hungry. And there were many witnesses who heard this. To be long hungry meant you were a glutton, a hog at the trough. It meant that you were capable of taking food out of your own family's mouth in order to gorge yourself. On January 14, 1938, Travis Smith and Luther Gable were out of jail, but Vernon had to stay 6 months until May 25, when all three men pleaded guilty to forgery and were sentenced by Judge Thomas Johnson to 3 years in the Mississippi State Prison at Parchman. Now, this photo is an odd photo for many reasons. It's a posed photo. One statement, or one report basically, that I read from someone actually says what they think this photo is saying, where it was taken. And it's very, very interesting. What this person's statement said: it is without any studio backdrop or lighting. All three are grim-faced. Gladys, dark and beautiful, neat and slender, is all eyes. Vernon is handsome and terrified. Elvis is cupid-lipped and stiff-fingered. Fear and panic leap out of their eyes, and all three are looking sideways. Something about the way that Gladys's cheek is pressed against Elvis's little hat has extended her arm behind him and is gripping Vernon's shoulder. This could indicate that it was taken at the police station. Maybe Gladys insisted that she and Vernon and Elvis have this remembrance of them all together. Something to cherish in the harsh months to follow for her and Elvis. Notice Elvis's pouting lips? It's because he had a peanut in his mouth. He loved peanuts from a very early age. On Wednesday, June 1, Vernon, prisoner number 12231, was registered. He was 21 years old, 5'10", and 5'10" and a half inches tall, and weighed 147 pounds. He described himself as a farmer. He could read and write and professed 5 years of schooling. Asked to identify his primary family, he chose to name neither his wife nor his mother, but rather his father alone, Jesse D. Presley. Life became harder for Gladys and Elvis while Vernon was locked up. Elvis missed his daddy and couldn't understand why he wasn't at home with him and his mum. Neighbours saw him crying daily, crying so hard he couldn't catch his breath. Gladys alone was not able to make payments on the little 2-room house, so they lost it and had to move. They lived with friends and relatives in East Tupelo for a while. Jesse D, Vernon's dad, wasn't being much help to his son's family. Maybe he was still angry at Vernon. But Gladys did get some help from Vernon's uncle Noah. Noah had a large family of his own, but he was always available when other family members needed help. Noah Presley drove her and other relatives to Parchment. Gladys would offer to pay the friends and relatives gas and oil for the trip. If she could afford it, fine. If she couldn't, she promised to pay it later. It was a long drive, about 4 to 5 hours each way. Gladys had to face a real grim reality. Each week she had to walk to the welfare office for her commodities. Canned butter, rice, flour, lard, cheese. A walk which so humiliated her and to which she so dreaded that she would beg her friends to accompany her. But she still couldn't bring herself to leave her little son in the care of anyone else. He was the only thing she had left after Vernon was in prison. On Sundays, when they didn't go to Parchment, Gladys, with Elvis, went to the Assembly of God Church, situated on the bottom of the hill below their house. Gladys's uncle, Gaines Mansell, was the minister. He had built the little wooden church with his own hands. Gladys might well feel that she had a special place, a refuge in a church that was built and led by one of her own people. Members of the Assembly Church of God in East Tupelo recall Elvis at about the age of 3, toddling down the aisle towards the singers at the front of the church, enthralled. His little mouth and voice attempting to imitate theirs. Later, Elvis repeatedly said that he liked gospel music best of all. He said, more or less, it puts your mind at rest, at least it does mine, and has done ever since I was 2. In 1938, Gladys took her little son and left Tupelo. Gladys, as the long months passed, had grown more and more uncomfortable living next door to her father-in-law due to JG's attitude towards his son. She moved in with her first cousin, Frank Richards, who lived with his family in Maple Street in South Tupelo. So Gladys was able to leave Elvis, now 4, with Frank and his wife, Leona, and their children while she worked at the nearby Mid-South Laundry. Always in her mind was how to get Vernon out. And she got up a petition. Members of the congregation of East Tupelo wrote a letter to Governor White and pled for pardon. She also wrote a letter to Orville Bean, pleading with him to assist her in freeing Vernon. On December 16, 1938, Orville Bean actually wrote a letter to Governor White in defence of Vernon. In part, that letter said, "This young man has a wife and one small child that are in financial distress. They need him very badly. He's not a bad man and never has been. The money has been repaid to me, and this man realises the mistake he has made, and I believe he has been sufficiently punished. He is a splendid young man, and if given a chance, I confidently believe he'll make a good and useful citizen. And for these reasons, I respectfully asked that you grant him a pardon. Yours very truly, O.S. Bean." It worked. The petition of the citizen of Lee County. Due to that petition, the letter of Orville Bean, Mississippi Governor Hugh Lawson White was persuaded to sign the order to release Vernon from Parchment. Vernon was released on February 6, 1939, after 15 months in jail. Travis Smith and Luther Gable were not out, nor would they be out until 1941, until they had served their full sentences. After serving less than 9 months of the 3-year sentence, Vernon was back home. But he didn't go back to East Tupelo. He moved in with Gladys and Elvis at her cousin Frank Richards' house. Well, there you go, guys. Turbulent start for Elvis. Turbulent start to a marriage for Gladys and Vernon. Hope you all enjoyed. Hit the like button, hit subscribe, and also comment down below. What do you think of the hardships that Gladys and Vernon had to go through? What do you think of Jesse completely abandoning his son like that? Let me know in the comments. Until next time, you all take care. Talk to you later. Bye.